all of the youngsters that are produced in the nesting season every year, we have greater numbers that come through in the south. And these are just some, Tim will be talking a lot more about this, I'm sure, but this just shows Doppler radar showing migration in action. If you don't know, the Doppler radar literally lights up when birds are migrating. And actually they'll become the dominant thing. And on the image on the left, there basically is no weather system there except in the Upper Peninsula and then off of the Outer Banks. And the one on the right, you have a weather system over South Michigan, but everything else are birds. And I mean, it's one of the great phenomena of nature. And some of the birds that do migrate, it just boggles the mind how they pull it off. And I always love telling the story about the blackpoll warblers and they always have the distinctive yellow legs, but these guys nest in the boreal forests. Even the ones that nest up in Alaska, all of them are going to orient across North America to the east coast of North America. And this illustration is a little dated because they can be anywhere from Georgia up to Nova Scotia. And then they wait for a passage of a low pressure system, and then they fly out over the open Atlantic Ocean. And they get higher and higher and higher, propelled by the tailwind. But the longer they're out over the open water, the less that tailwind dissipates, and they come under the influence of the northeast trade winds, which deflect them down towards Venezuela, and they make the flight nonstop. 80 to 90 hours. And it's one of the most amazing things that this tiny little speck of a bird can store up enough fuel and then not only use that fuel in flight, but also catabolize its own digestive system, because there is no place to set down until it gets to the tropics. They spend the winter in the tropics, then the island hop on the way back. And so this is, one of the poster birds for migration, but there are so many species which migrate. And of course, as they're migrating, they're encountering some obstacles. And one of the obstacles that they encounter is light. And so here's a picture taken of the United States and Canada at night, and you just see how much extraneous light there's there. Now, most of these birds at night, they're flying high in the sky, and it's not really a big problem for them, because they're flying high above any obstacles on the ground. But it turns out that our buildings can be real be sources of mortality to them. You are looking at what we now call 200 Public Square, or the Huntington Building, but originally it was called the BP Building. And a volunteer for the Lake Erie Nature and Science Center, Sue Roman, in the mid-2000s, worked downtown, and she would walk around the base of just that building, and she would pick up the birds, the dead and dying birds on the ground, and she would take them out to the Lake Erie Nature and Science Center. And they did their best to rehabilitate the living, and they recorded all the ones that came in. And she had years where they had like over almost 700 birds, more than 600 birds killed, that she recovered from the base of that one building. It was just incredible. And it turns out that white-throated sparrows seem to be the big-time victim. And this was published in the Kirtland Bird Calendar, and I became aware of it, and also efforts from the Fatal Light Awareness Program in Toronto and Lights Out Chicago, and thought, hey, maybe this is something that we could do something about. And here's a white-throated sparrow belly up in front of a brightly lit building, which is one part of the equation of what's wrong with our cities, but of course all the glass in the background. And actually here's the Hilton at the convention center, and you see just how reflective it is. If you're a bird, how do you distinguish between what's free airspace and what's not? And this is the peril of downtown Cleveland. Now, again, most migratory birds would be flying over, but they're flying at night. And as they approach dayfall, they're looking for green places to be able to find food. Well, every little park, every little open green space that you've got in the city is a place that brings the birds down amongst the glass windows. And of course, at night, you've got the brightly lit buildings, which when it is foggy, ends up being irresistibly attractive to the birds. They're just drawn right into them. And so we became aware of this, and we thought, let's start something to help in Cleveland. Let's try and work with building owners to get them to turn the lights off in spring and fall migration. So we created something called Smart Light Safe Flight. Why didn't we call it Lights Out Cleveland at the time? Because I had given a program, and in the audience was Connie Schultz and her husband, now Senator Sherrod Brown. And when I said, hey, I was just in Chicago at an AZA meeting, I think this was 2010, and they were doing this great thing to protect the birds. We should do the same thing. And Connie Schultz said, great, whenever you do it, I want to write a column on it. And Sherrod Brown said, great, but whatever you do, don't call it Lights Out Cleveland. We're a Rust Belt city with a declining manufacturing base. It sounds like we're turning out the lights on our economy. So we, mindful of that, we came up with Smart Light Safe Flight. And this original logo actually has a barn swallow, which is not the right poster bird for a Lights Out. So anyway, we tried to work with building owners and managers in the Downtown Cleveland Alliance and some others, and we had some traction. But the whole idea was, how can we work with the downtown folks so that we can get building owners and managers to recognize the threat and at least turn their lights off? And then can we work proactively then with building designers, architects, and the like to see if they can't incorporate bird-friendly designs in their new buildings? I'd love to tell you that it just took off like a rocket in 2010. It didn't. It was a long struggle, and we had a few buildings that signed out early on, but it was kind of like a who moved my cheese thing. It was like, well, are they doing it? Well, if they're not, I'm not going to do it. And so clearly something was missing. And that something was Matt Schumer, Tim Jasinski, Andy Jones, Jen Brumfield, and Shane Good. And that was the birth of Lights Out Cleveland, which is operated under the aegis of the Ohio Bird Conservation Initiative, and it's one of many Lights Out Ohio programs in the state that Ohio Bird Conservation Initiative oversees. And it was clear from the start what this program needed. And by the way, you see this wonderful logo with a woodcock, who is a huge victim of our downtown building, that Jan Brumfield put together for us, which is, far more appropriate. And so that was the genesis, I think 4 years ago now, 4.5 years ago, of the Lights Out Cleveland program. But now I'm going to yield the floor to my colleague, Tim Jasinski, because Tim was instrumental in creating a monitoring program that has taken this, it's hard to even say to the next level. It's hard, he's taken it to so many different levels, both in terms of animal welfare, in terms of building enlistment, and especially in terms of new science. So take it away, Tim.
Let's see if this works. Can you guys see my presentation?
Yep.
Okay. All right, so everyone can see that?
Yep.
Okay, so you guys saw that. Harvey already covered that. Obviously window strikes are a huge thing. All rehabbers deal with this. And any rehabber that does lights out effort deals with many, many more. So up to a billion birds are killed by windows annually, and that's probably a very low estimate because we're working on some research now. But there's often a thought that when a bird hits a window and it flies away, it's okay, and that's actually not the case. And so we're learning more about that now. But next to cats, birds are the window collisions are the #1 issue for bird mortality. That is sort of a simple fix. So that's a lot of birds, and that's not sustainable over time. It's just gonna, our numbers are already on the decline, and so that's just not not something we can continue to do. So what Harvey said, we started the monitoring program, and that was actually to prove what was really happening in Cleveland. And if I go close to time, let me know and I'll stop talking, because I'll just keep going forever about this. But because of that lady Sue Roman, we got ideas on where the birds were colliding the most, and we started a monitoring program. But there's two main reasons why birds hit windows besides a hawk chasing them. And most people don't realize that there's two reasons. Number one is when it's dark out, like Harvey had said, the birds are attracted to the lights, just like they are like a moth to your porch light. They're attracted to those lights that are inside the building. So that photo on the left you see there is all lit up inside there. That's the Huntington building, the BP building Harvey had mentioned. And so when a bird's flying in the dark, it's attracted to that light and hits the window and falls down and is either killed or injured, either by the impact or by the second impact of it hitting the ground. And then on the right side, you'll see the reflection. So that's the secondary reason why birds collide with windows, is because they are seeing what they think is an extension of the habitat, but it's actually just a reflection. And then they hit the window and they're killed. So those are the two main reasons why, particularly in lights out efforts, why birds hit windows. And you can see that beautiful black Bernie in there in the middle was met its demise to that window. So the lights out monitoring program started with me and a bunch of bird nerds and zookeeper friends and just friends in general. And we started a monitoring effort going along Sue Roman's data on where she would find the birds. And we just hit the streets from 5 a.m. until about 8:30, 9 o'clock, depending. Every day, unless it was pouring rain, from March 15th through the beginning of June, and August 15th through like mid-November. And we would go down every day and collect these birds. And Sue Roman had collected about 2,000 birds in 5 years. And we collected 2,500 birds our first fall doing it. So we collect an average of 3,000 birds a year down there. Most of them are in the fall, like, from what Harvey said, because of the young birds migrating, the migration patterns are different. Most of them are in the fall, which is nice because spring is crazy busy already, and I don't think we can handle 2,000 birds in the spring. And so we, on average, rehab about a third of those are coming to the center live. And we actually have, ironically, which is really interesting and we're very proud of, in 2019, we had a 95% release recovery on the live lights out Cleveland birds that came into the captivity. So that's really huge. We're really proud of that. So you never know what you're going to find down there. That grasshopper sparrow there on the left, we get a few of those a year. That bird on the right there is a golden-winged warbler. That is the first one and only one we've collected so far in lights out Cleveland history. But you never know what you're going to pick up. And so, the whole goal of this is to try to figure out where the collisions are happening in order to get data to prove it's happening, even though we know it's happening, and get the birds that are alive, back to the center to be rehabbed. And I think one of the best things about this is that a rehabber is, me is running up this monitoring program. So I already know how to deal with stress and other things on wild birds. So I think that's why our success is so much more than many other lights out efforts, because we have a rehabber that's handling it. And so we know how to handle stress and what to do. Downtown is an amazing migrant trap for songbirds. You can see all this habitat behind you or in front of you here. I've seen more Connecticut warblers downtown than anywhere in my life, and there's a lot. Oh no, that's a reflection. Sorry, that's not habitat. But that's what we're dealing with down there, is the birds think that's habitat and then they slam into it and they're killed. Look at all this habitat, great places for sparrows, catbirds, warblers, woodcock and everything. And it's a reflection. And so you see that dead white-throated sparrow there. This is just nonstop down there. The birds just don't understand that concept of glass. There's some trees in the middle of the public square there that will host magnolia warblers, Baltimore orioles, and everyone else, and it's a reflection. I had to throw those slides in there for you because it's really a huge thing that most people don't get to see is how reflective some of these glass buildings are down there. One thing that we noted that seems pretty obvious, but we wouldn't have really known until we really took the data down, is that most of the collisions happen where there's an adjacent to green space. So where that 105 there is on the left, that's the west side of the Huntington building, right next to Public Square, which has a lot of habitat. So most of the collisions happen at that side of the building, or any side of any building that has a lot of habitat, like green space, trees, bushes, things like that. So it seems it's definitely an obvious thing, but you wouldn't really even think about it until you're down there doing this. One thing that I have to do every night is look at the weather patterns to see if I think we're going to need to monitor the next morning or not. And I will look at these different maps and different apps on my phone that are looking into weather radar. So the one on the left is Windy TV or windy.com or something, I think now. It shows actually the wind patterns. So that night you could see there was been in the spring, and all those south winds coming up, those southeast winds coming up all the way from down to Kentucky, all the way up straight through Cleveland, all the way to Toronto. Birds will use that in their advantage to migrate, because if they work less flying at night, and it's cooler, and so the birds use that as a tailwind to help cruise up. On the right there, you see this is NexRad radar, and you can see in front of that storm, that big green thing all along the middle there, that's an actual storm, but then everything around that is all bird migration, like Harvey had mentioned before. So there was no migration that night really in Cleveland, because the storms had dropped all the birds. And you can see there on the left and right just how many birds are moving, and it's estimated that in those green little donuts, or the blue donuts where it's green in the middle, that's an average of like 350,000 birds at one point, all migrating on their own but together at the same time. It's really interesting. So I look at these things every night and try to determine if it's going to be busy or if it's not. We really haven't figured out exactly how to predict yes or no, but what we figured out is that low pressure systems or low cloud ceilings or precipitation causes the most issues for migration when there's a good night for movement. So birds will be flying and they hit that low cloud ceiling, they fly lower and lower, and then they're right at the top of the buildings there. So that is what causes a fallout. And that means that all the birds that are flying and migrating are now descending to the ground because they can't fly in the weather. So you can see we take photos every day when we're down there of just these things to use in presentations. So here's just a couple photos I threw together here of what we take. That's one of the main offending spots of the Huntington building, the BP building. Many Connecticut warblers are found there, woodcocks, catbirds. And what's interesting is most of the birds we're finding dwell lower in the habitat than other birds. So there's kind of a two-part to this. One part is that the birds that we find most of don't make night flight calls, and that's one thing that Andy Jones at the museum and Ben Winger over there in the Field Museum in Chicago figured out that, why are we not getting any flycatchers or tanagers or vireos when they're very, very numerous in around the eastern part of the United States, but we get very little. And what they found is that the birds that are migrating, like the sparrows, the thrushes, the warblers, make night flight calls and make little chip notes as they're flying. And we're thinking that as they're doing that, when they get trapped downtown and they're circling these buildings, lost and disoriented, they're calling and calling and calling, which is bringing more birds in from around the atmosphere there, and then it causes more of an issue. So you can just see all the habitat along these windows here, that's a horrible place for catbirds to be found. That's us collecting. I'm not sure what bird that was, but you can see they think you can just walk right through that. And actually, when construction is happening, if you ever notice people, construction sites, they'll have paper tape along the glass because people will walk into it because they don't see it as glass, and just birds don't understand that. They didn't evolve with glass. We developed it, and they don't understand that. There's that photo that Harvey used earlier with me in my shorts in November. Another issue we see is when there's habitat inside the buildings, which is actually pretty common. So the birds flying this little narrow spot here are delighted to see those trees that they could feed on. And then obviously there's a glass wall in between that, and they fall to their demise. And actually the building owner, or the building manager for that building, I was talking to him one day, and he was asking me what, how this happens. And right at that spot, a white-throated sparrow zoomed right past us, slammed into the window, and fell dead right at his shoulders. And he was like, frazzled. I'm like, yeah, it happens all morning long and all day long. You can see they hit those skywalks on the left-hand side there. And just that big, huge reflection there is just something that birds can't understand. So obviously, being a rehabber, we know how to handle the birds. So I taught all of our volunteers how to handle the birds safely. We catch them in nets. They're often concussed, laying on the ground there like that. So that's one of my volunteers, Alicia, catching a Nashville warbler. We catch him. You can see he didn't even move when you captured him, because he's so out of it that. Of the cranial swelling that they get. And most rehabbers know this, but people that aren't, that are viewing this presentation don't know that most birds don't die from a neck break. People often think that they broke their neck, but it's actually from cranial swelling that causes their demise or causes them to be injured like that. So that's my rock star of Kent volunteer there, getting the Nashville into the net. And that's me holding a swamp sparrow in the bander's grip. We put them in paper bags, which keeps them in a dark, quiet spot. As most rehabbers are always educating on, anytime you find an injured animal, keep it a dark, quiet place, no food or water. And so the birds get back to the car as soon as we can to let them rest there while we're still monitoring. And then in the morning, or when the team drops them off at the center, they also go into these steel cages in bags still to let them rest once again after transport. And I think that's why we have such good success, because we let them chill for a little bit. A lot of times, we want to hurry up and figure out what's wrong with them, but that could actually cause more stress. We also photograph the dead birds down there, because we use that in our presentations to really show the power in a photo. When you're not down there doing this. That's me photographing a dead grasshopper sparrow. My all-time crazy volunteer Janice took that photo and left there, where you can see terminal tower in the background with that dead white-throated sparrow. On the right side there, you see two oven birds at the same spot there. This is a dead swamp sparrow, a myrtle warbler, and I'm not sure what sparrow that is down there, probably white-throated. And the birds litter the ground when you have a good flight or bad flight, depending on how you look at it. On the right here, there was, I think, at least 10 dead birds laying after a good flight one morning. This is near CSU. On the left-hand side, you can see that guy chillaxing there in his chair, while there is a whole slew of warblers laying injured and dead along that window. And most people don't even know why that's happening. So the amount of education we can do down there, not only saving these birds, but also educating the public and telling them really what's going on. And it really comes down to the public awareness, you get in the building owners and managers to kind of try to help us with this problem. We also find bats down there. Bats do collide with windows. I don't really understand it really, but they do. We do find a lot of bats, and one bat was actually rescued this morning, and they're all transferred over to Penitentiary Glen Wildlife Center for their care. Since we deal with so many birds, we can't add bats to our list of animals we care for, because we just don't have the resources with the white nose protocol. So Penn Glen is happy to take the bats, and that's a silver-haired bat there being defensive on the ground. They chew through bags, we found out. So we always triple or quadruple close the bags, because the bats are sneaky and they do get out. But that's one thing we don't let happen anymore. And we label the bags with what species, if we know what it is, the time on when the bird or bat collided, the building, the side of the building, and any other pertinent information we can add on there. So this is data that is used for our collision data that Andy Jones and his team at the museum put together, and we can really learn about collisions and when it happens and why it happens, and just with all this data that we collect down there. That was my car one morning on October 26, 2017. I thought migration was over for the year, and I was going to about cancel it. And my birthday was the 25th, and we were out celebrating in a normal year at restaurants in the public next to each other, which we don't do anymore. I get a text from John Brunfield, dude, check out the radar. So I looked at the radar. I'm like, oh man, it was lit up. It was the last huge push of the fall. And we had 255 collisions that we knew of that we're able to collect down there. And there were mostly sparrows, some flickers, some woodcock, think there's some kinglets in there, and those are just all the dead ones. I think we had 123 live or something like that. It was insane. It's a huge problem, and you really, you don't know how bad it is until you actually are down there seeing it. It's pretty rough. Then when we get to the center, we have all of our enclosures set up per species. So all these little tanks are loaded with warblers and sparrows and kinglets and all these different species. And I think one of the parts about my job that I'm so proud of is that I use the animal's natural history in order to care for them properly, to make them comfortable in captivity, because no animal wants to be in captivity. But if you can make them happy enough to eat and they'll gain weight, they can heal better and you can release them better. You have a better success rate with that. So this is a small little section of our caging. But one thing we're really proud of is woodcock care. I've actually had people reach out to me from New York, all over the states, on how we care for our woodcocks. They're a very, very stressy species. They don't do well in captivity unless you set them up right. The two main things rehabbers don't do properly, I think, in their care is give them enough food, which is like 50 to 80 night crawlers a night, and a natural looking habitat in an enclosure there, where it's real dark. And I don't know if I have a picture. I think the next one might be where I have actually on the top of the enclosure, I put foam up there. So when they start feeling better, they'll fly up and hit the foam and they don't hurt themselves again. And then we have a better chance of release. In 2019, we released more woodcock than American robins. So that's just insanity. That's how we keep them real dark. That's woodcock. So another bird that normally wouldn't do well are brown creepers. You just got to think of how they feed. They feed vertically like that. So you just make little perches with vertical perches and sprinkle mealworms all over it in the dish and on the perches, and they do well and they gain weight and we can release them. So it's a really fun thing to do. It's a lot of work. Like I said, we deal with about 700, 800 birds in the fall that they come in live, and it's a lot of work, but it's gratifying to be able to get them back out there where they belong. It's a little winter wren here, keeping the wrens like it real thick. So you pack these cages with real branches or fake artificial plants and just keep them comfortable, and then they'll be willing, that it's more willing to feel better and to gain weight and to get move their migration back. So that is part of my part of it. So I will try to figure out how we can get this under here. So how do I unshare this thing here? How do I do this? There we go, unshare. Okay. Now it's Shane's turn, I believe.
Yep, you got it.
Hi, everybody. I'm going to try and go ahead and share my screen now. Does everyone see that?
Yep.
Okay, great. I'm going to try and turn it on to full screen there. So my name is Shane Good. I'm the Director of Collection Management at the Akron Zoo. And we are a traditional zoo. When you think of zoos, many people think of lions, tigers, and bears, oh my. And we have all that, but we have really thrown a lot of resources at North American songbird conservation. Mainly because I think, as Harvey said earlier in his presentation, being effective in conservation starts in your own backyard. And so we have definitely put a focus on North American songbird conservation at our zoo. And when Tim was talking about the Lights Out program, there's often two different outcomes we often see. Is either these birds strike a window and they either die, or Tim and his team are able to rehabilitate them to a level that they can be released. But there is a small percentage every year, roughly, I'd say maybe somewhere between 10 to 30 birds per year that I get from Tim that are rehabilitated, that are deemed non-releasable. And here at the Akron Zoo, we can provide them a home. This is a slide of our North American songbird aviary. It's about 2,800 square feet and about 25 to 35 feet tall. It is built into a hillside. We have heaters underneath the deck for our migratory species. Also, you will see there's a building to the right at the top of the aviary with some little square windows. That is an aviary holding that is heated so that our migratory species can stay warm during the winter months. They will readily fly in and out of the holding. They use the heaters underneath the deck. This aviary has been very effective for most songbird species. We haven't done well with things that traditionally prefer prairie type habitat, things like meadowlark. We don't have a good habitat for shorebirds or things like that. But as far as your traditional woodland species, we've had a very successful program with these species. Here's a view from the inside of the aviary. So like a traditional zoo, we have graphics, we have educational programs. At any given time, we range from roughly about 30 different species in the aviary, and we've had over 100 birds at that time. So I call it birding, cheating at birding. So for the average urban public member that comes to our zoo, they probably aren't birders. They might not know the difference between a one warbler species to the next. And so it is really important for those who are less familiar with birding to be able to have that opportunity in our urban landscape. Here at the zoo, we focus on both citizen science and conservation programs. I think all of you are familiar with things like bird counts, and we're talking quite a bit about Lights Out Akron and Lights Out Cleveland, but I did want to focus on a couple things you may not have heard of, which is our North American Songbird SAFE program. SAFE stands for Saving Animals from Extinction. We also have a North American Songbird Working Group in the zoo world, and then we are a part of the Ohio Bird Conservation Initiative. The North American Songbird Working Group is focused on animal husbandry. So what we try and do is expand husbandry practices for these species. And the zoo world goes, going all the way back to 150 years ago. We've mostly focused on exotic species, things like gorillas and elephants and giraffes. And only until very recently have we focused on things like North American songbirds. And so a lot of the husbandry for these species is new, and we are learning a lot about mixing these different species in an aviary type setting. Here at the Akron Zoo, we currently have probably the largest North American songbird aviary in the world. Columbus Zoo has a large one as well. The National Zoo in Washington, D.C. is in the process of building one. So the trend is growing in the zoo world to have North American songbirds in our collection. Part of our goal is to keep common birds common. We want to do our part to keep cardinals and robins and blue jays and things that we commonly see in our backyards and keep them common so that we don't have a situation like Harvey talked about with the passenger pigeon. We are also trying to use what we learned from these aviaries to help with species that desperately need our help right now. Two of the biggest programs in the zoo world are the Florida grasshopper sparrow program and the loggerhead shrike program. So we have focused a lot of resources into the reintroduction and management of these species. Zoos are playing a critical role. The photo above the birds is showing a holding at one of our zoo partners that's off exhibit holding dedicated specifically to breeding North American songbirds for release back into the wild through official reintroduction programs with both state and federal agencies. So it's a big part of what we're doing in the zoo world. The other part is what we call our North American Songbird SAFE. And we have 7 goals for that. And our Akron Zoo has steering committee members on all of these programs. Obviously, the reduction of bird collisions with glass, that's all a part of what we talk about with the Lights Out programs. We're doing a lot of work right now in the zoo world on trying to reduce free roaming cats and their impacts on wildlife, preserving and enhancing habitat, reducing contaminants, promoting bird-friendly coffee, promoting citizen science, and the reduction of North American songbird trafficking. And that last one, number 7, may be one you haven't heard a lot about, but we know it exists. It's a much worse problem in Asia than it is in North America, but it is coming into our North American borders, where we're seeing animals stolen for the pet trade and things like that. And so it's become a problem down in Florida, where there's people running mist nets to actually capture North American songbirds and put them into the pet trade. So we are using our zoo resources, which has been very effective in combating what's known as the Asian songbird crisis. And a big part of what they've done with that program is now being folded into North American songbirds. Where we've made a lot of strides is in the zoo world is our work to reduce free roaming cats. And those of you who are in the rehabilitation field, I'm sure have seen the impact of cats on wildlife. It is estimated that 2.4 billion songbirds are killed annually by cats. And if you tally up that 2.4 billion killed by cats, the up to 500 million killed in window collisions, it to me is a wonder we have any birds left. The impact of humans and our pets on wildlife is severe, and we're doing all we can to try and turn that around. The other area that zoos are really focusing on is promoting bird-friendly coffee. The graphic you see on the left of the screen is the official logo of bird-friendly coffee. That's the gold standard that we encourage people to look for when they buy products. No zoo is doing this better than the National Zoo. Their new exhibit is actually going to start by walking you through a habitat that resembles a coffee plantation in South America. You follow migration through the building into North America, and you'll end your trip through the exhibit in a coffee shop that serves only bird-friendly coffee. So it's a great program. All of my friends who are coffee drinkers this Christmas got bird-friendly coffee for Christmas. My house smelled like a Starbucks all Christmas season. So if you're on my Christmas shopping list next year, you will get some bird-friendly coffee, I'm sure. Here at Akron Zoo, we sponsor 2 of the Lights Out programs through our conservation fund. So we financially support Lights Out Akron and Lights Out Cleveland. Both of those programs fall under the Ohio Bird Conservation Initiative, OBCI for short. And so there are multiple programs throughout Ohio, Toledo, Columbus, Cincinnati, Dayton, and of course, Akron and Cleveland. And so we support those both by supporting financially and with supplies. We take on the monitoring of the Akron Canton area. And again, we also provide the best case scenario of providing a home for those non-releasable birds. As I mentioned, it's estimated anywhere from 365 to 988 million birds killed annually by window collisions in the United States. But here at the Akron Zoo, we have a lot of those non-releasable birds that end up here. So I guess if there's any take-home message from my presentation, for those of you working in rehabilitation, we can provide your non-releasable birds a potential home, and they do quite well here. This is one of our keepers with an oriole that is coming to her hand to receive mealworms. This is a bird that was a wild oriole just 6 months prior and is now landing in a zookeeper's hand. Our keepers are doing great training with these animals. By having them come to the hand, we can inspect them to check their health, their molting. Maybe a lot of these birds came in with injuries such as eye injuries, wing injuries, and we can monitor those animals and their continued health. This makes a great VIP experience, so we can bring in donors to observe these animals really close up. We've done a little funny play on COVID and social distancing, and have trained our birds to socially distance. And so it's a little fun program we can do for the public. And if birds can do it, why can't we as humans? This common yellowthroat in our collection is scale trained. Again, these are birds that just a few months prior were actually living in the wild and have adapted quite well to zoo life. And another big part of what we're doing is not only talking the talk, but walking the walk as well. And many of our buildings now have the films that you see for window strike prevention. As you can see, these can be quite artistic. There's two ways of doing this. It's starting out from new construction projects right at the beginning, but then for older buildings that haven't taken in bird safety to begin with, there's a lot of different types of film treatments that you can do. This is our welcome center at the Akron Zoo. They can do pretty much anything you would want done on a building, from dots to lines to artistic silhouettes like we have. They could make logos and have little tiny logos on your building for marketing purposes. The sky is the limit of what can be done with these programs. But what I wanted to share with you, the bottom of the screen is my email address here at the Akron Zoo. So if you do have non-releasable birds, we'd love to help you. If the Akron Zoo can't help, we have a large network of zoos across the country that we can post on our zoo listservs and see if we can get a placement for your non-releasables. So feel free to contact me with that information, and I'm more than happy to help. I wanted to keep my presentation on the short side and leave time for any questions if there were. So it's a hard thing to follow people like Harvey and Tim, but hopefully you found the zoo piece of this interesting as well.
All right, excellent job, gentlemen. We have a couple questions. Let me go back up here. So Kristen asked, and I think this is directed towards you, Shane, do you house non or semi-flighted birds in the aviary?
We do house semi-flighted. What we have found is because our aviary, as you saw, is kind of built into the hillside and has almost 3 different levels. The lower level, there's a mid-level, and that upper deck. What we use to determine suitability is they need to be able to fly at least 8 feet. So we've had birds with maybe are blind in one eye, they're partially flighted, but for us, the key has been, can they fly at least 8 feet? And so I work quite a bit with Tim on these birds, and he knows what we're able to accommodate, and he's done quite well with finding birds for us. Sure.
All right, and Manon asked, what's the average lifespan of songbirds that live in your care, Shane?
You know, that's really hard to answer because, one, so many of our birds come from the wild, so we don't know how old they were when they were first brought into rehabilitation. Some of our birds are born in zoos, hatched in zoos, so that we do know their exact ages, but so many of the rehabilitated birds, one, I don't know if they were 2 years old when they came in, or they could have been 10 years old. And then so many come in with injuries. Some of them have lingering effects from those injuries, and they just haven't been able to survive no matter how much care we put into them. Others, so we have some of the original birds that we brought in when we opened the aviary back in 2012, and are still with us today. So we do have birds that are between the ages of 10 and 15, but I can't easily answer that because I often don't know how old they were when they came in.
Sure, makes sense. Well, that's all the questions I see. Again, thank you, all three of you, for being here today and joining this crowd. I'm sure they gained a lot of knowledgeable information. So we will take a break. We're gonna